Afternoon, Cherries fans, and welcome to this latest opposition preview show here on Up the Cherries in All Departments. Following our impressive 3-0 win at the Coventry Building Society Arena on Monday, we have a visit from league leaders, Fulham, who have already been promoted. Before I welcome in my special guest, who you will recognise, here's a little bit about our sponsors, Dental on the Banks. To find out what they can do for you, visit dentalonthebanks.co.uk. Now, my special guest today actually covered the Cherries in the Premier League. After our relegation, he did start following Fulham in the Premier League for The Athletic. It is a pleasure to welcome onto the show Peter Rutzler. Good afternoon, Peter. It's good to see a familiar face. How are you doing?
Good to see you too, Craig. No, I'm really good, thank you. Yeah, really good. Obviously, with promotion confirmed this week, it's been a busy one, but a good one for sure.
Excellent. Of course, you did cover the Cherries in the Premier League and have been covering Fulham for the past 2 seasons after our relegation. So we'll come to that. But of course, the first thing we have to mention is the promotion celebrations that happened on Tuesday night following the 3-0 win against Preston. What was Marco Silva's initial reaction afterwards? Was the focus on the Premier League or securing the title?
I think for Marco Silva, when he was appointed, I think the primary objective, the first thing on the list was to get Fulham back into the Premier League the first time of asking and via the automatics. Everything else is, I suppose, is secondary to that. But once that was achieved, once that's done, obviously the ambition now is to secure the title, having led the division for most of the season. You know, have something tangible that reflects how good they have been, because they have been very, very impressive all season. And yeah, so that's probably where it is. But I think fundamentally for him and for Fulham, it's about being back in the Premier League and getting there as easily as possible and at the first time of asking.
So we shouldn't expect Fulham to be on the beach really on Saturday.
No, I might myself go and pop down to the beach before the game, because it's been a while since I've been down, and I do miss it. I do miss the sights around Bournemouth. Definitely, yeah. Well, it's not too bad around here, obviously by the river, but yeah, not quite the same as the beach. But in terms of the players, no, they did have a night out on Tuesday, but I think they will be those hangovers or anything like that will have been nursed by them. They're very keen to make sure that they secure the title, and if anything, they may play with a bit more freedom, because there is that sort of, as you get close to the line, there's that little bit of more pressure, and the players have talked about it as well. And now that's gone, so it's just got to get the title now, and without the stress of worrying about getting over the line to secure promotion.
That's what we didn't want to hear, to be perfectly honest, because of course we're not over the line. We could very soon be joining Fulham in the Premier League. In the past 6 games, Fulham have won 3 and lost 3. Those defeats coming against Coventry, Derby, and West Brom. Have the performances been there, or have there been those jitters?
For Fulham,
Yeah.
yeah, no. To be honest, the performances haven't been great of late. They're, as you said, I think they've only scored, at least before Preston, it was, I think, 6 goals in 6 games, which by Fulham standards, as we've seen for most of the season, is not good. It's not great. And there have been 2 sides to it. I think before the international break, there was a little bit of fatigue. There'd been a lot of fixtures in a short amount of time, and then since then they got some very key results. QPR, Middlesbrough, both massive wins that sort of took the edge off a little. But just those stumbling blocks, they could have got it done quicker, and then there's a little frustration of that, I'm sure. But I think, just going back to what I was saying earlier, really, I think there was that little bit of pressure that they weren't enjoying their football as much. I think it's a key part of the way Fulham play is with a smile on your face, which is the line that keeps coming back, and haven't really been able to do that with the focus on trying to get promotion. But we saw that come back on Tuesday night against Preston. I think once they got that first goal, the atmosphere at Craven Cottage was great, and it just carried them through. And they play in a fluent attacking style of football that is about enjoyment. It's about entertainment, and that's when they're at their best. And I suppose we hadn't seen that, but we have now. So they'll want to maintain that for these tough remaining games.
Of course, Scott Parker was in charge of Fulham the last time they were in the Premier League. And of course, he's in charge of the Cherries now. He did come in for some criticism from the Fulham faithful, but also has come in for some criticism here as well. Are there similarities in the approach at both clubs that he employed? And what did Marco Silva change?
It's a good question. I think from my perspective, I haven't seen as much of Bournemouth or as much of Fulham actually in the Championship in that season to make clear and a very fair assessment. But what has come back, and I think from discussions I've had with Fulham supporters, and I suppose it's always been interesting seeing the debates on social media and the like around it. There is a much more structured way of playing. Is probably a simple way of putting it. There's a very clearly defined philosophy that when it works, as you would have seen in that fantastic start to the season, is really effective. There's a real dominance to the way Scott Parker wants his side to play, particularly on the ball. It's controlling matches through possession, and in a way that's similar to how Fulham play. Just Fulham play with a little bit more attacking freedom, I suppose. I think for a Scott Parker team, once they're in front, it's about maintaining that advantage and playing to the percentages in that sense. And I think at Fulham there was a sense of that they would struggle if they went behind in games. They would do well when they get ahead. Really good at seeing matches out. But it was all about getting the result, getting the job done. And I think you've seen that. And at times it can be slow. It can be frustrating because you sometimes want a bit more ingenuity, a bit more flair that can be implemented in the team. And I think that's where the similarities lie. But I think when Bournemouth this year have been at their best, we've seen some fantastic attacking football, some really well-crafted goals. I think Dominic Solanke is a striker that Scott Parker really loves because of the amount of work he gets through. High press, really tactical, intelligent in the game, and that suited them. It's interesting because when I covered Scott Parker's side in the Premier League, they changed the way they played. With Fulham, in the Championship they were built around Mitrovic. Mitrovic was the goal scorer. Feed Mitrovic, he will score, and that was the structure to it. And it got them over the line essentially. Although, admittedly, by the time through the playoffs, Mitrovic wasn't available, so showed their versatility. But when they went into the Premier League, they moved away from that and they became a much more counter-pressing, fluid team, and it was really interesting to see how they adapted. They moved to a back three that would sometimes become a back four with Bobby Deckard over Reed as a fluid sort of right wing back, right back, and then getting forward. And they were really competitive in every game. And it was interesting that sort of tactical style. There were some tough games to watch. There were some 0-0s, and there were some difficult games which Fulham probably look back on and thought we should have won that. But when you actually assess it, they were competitive in almost every game for a long period, having had a slow start and whatever. And at one point in the first 6 games, they had a tight turnaround from the playoff final. They were at a disadvantage, but they got themselves back in it, and they won at Anfield. And genuinely, I think most observers of the team, myself included, anticipated that they might get out of it, that they might at least take it to the last day, but they just fell away. They passed those opportunities by, and in a different outcome, there's every chance it could have stayed up, I think. So I suppose this is the interesting factor, is that the way Scott Parker likes to play, he is pragmatic. He can change things around. He and his staff are the tinkerers. They will think about things and adapt to opposition sides, and that will be important in the Premier League. And I think that's where it could come into its own. And I think Solanke really will suit what they may want to do next year.
It was a debate I was having the other day, actually, and with regards to Solanke. And Solanke has been outstanding this season. He's led the line on his own for large parts of this season. When you compare him against Callum Wilson back in 2014, 2015, of course, Callum was fantastic, but he did have a strike partner with him in Jan Kermorgan or Brett Pittman. With that in mind, who would you say has outperformed themselves? Would you say Solanke is the better player? And do you think he would have scored as many as Callum did in the first championship promotion?
Oh, good question. I think they're very different players, and I actually think what Dom Solanke is probably Callum Wilson probably would disagree with this, but I think he can be more rounded than Wilson is. Wilson was always an off the shoulder sort of poacher type, works very hard, good technique on the ball, but he's much more of the type that wants to come alive in the penalty area. And as you say, would have that second striker with him. Sometimes in the Premier League it was Dom Solanke and obviously Joshua King as well. He would use that his partner, whether it be Kermorgan or Pittman, to exploit spaces, where Pittman and Kermorgan would find those spaces, drag defenders, he would get in behind. But he was so clinical. And I suppose with Solanke, the big change this year is the fact that he's found that confidence in front of goal, hasn't he? And he's now been able to add goals to his game, because even in that final relegation season, you could see with Solanke that he was doing everything right. He was good in the air. He was good, really good technically. I mean, he would play in that secondary striker role behind Callum, and would be able to knit play together and move the ball up the field, press really well, which is so important as a modern striker. But who would score more? I think. I guess it does depend on the setup. I think the way Eddie Howe plays is different to how Scott Parker plays. That is a really tricky question. I would probably say Callum Wilson, because of what we've seen since. But I suppose there's a bigger sample size with Callum Wilson than there has been with Dom Solanke. He's still got some more years ahead of him. But I mean, what Dom Solanke's shown this year is that he can do that as well. And I think that's really encouraging. And to be honest, I may have a different answer in 6 months' time.
No, fair enough. And to be fair, one thing that has really pleased me with Solanke is he will drop back. He will make things happen for other teammates. Whereas Callum Wilson, like you say, is on the shoulder and a bit of a poacher, but a great striker all the same. It's just a shame he's been injured for so long for Newcastle. With regards to Scott Parker and why he left Fulham. What do you feel the reasoning was? Was it a case of that he was always wanting to come to Bournemouth, or do you think it was a case that he'd been relegated with Fulham, he felt that he'd taken Fulham as far as he could and wanted a new challenge?
Yeah, to be honest, I think it was that. I think he did feel he'd taken Fulham as far as he could. I think there had been that long-standing interest from Bournemouth. Bournemouth had identified him sometime before. I mean, I remember as I started to cover Fulham, even hearing at that point, when after Eddie Howe's exit, that his name came up at that point, which sort of showed the interest and how long-standing it had been. I think there were multiple factors. I think when he was in the Premier League, Fulham recruited a lot of players on loan, some good players. It had a good squad, but a lot of them left, and that meant he would need to use some of the players that he hadn't, paid as much attention to in the Premier League, who probably weren't going to be as easy to manage, perhaps as you'd want in the Championship. And I think also he probably wanted a bit more say over recruitment, the way Fulham structure things. He had a couple of run-ins with Tony Khan, the owner's son and the director of football operations. And I think Bournemouth, for him, offered him a bit more space to build things in his own image. Because I think for as much as there was all that sort of talk about rumours and rifts or whatever, but in reality, Fulham didn't have as much room for manoeuvre with their squad because they had good Championship players that the club knew could get them promoted again on good contracts, and a wholesale summer of changes. I don't know if Scott Parker would have wanted that, but realistically, if he wanted it to shape his team in a different way, then that would have been the case. I don't think his relationship with Alexander Mitrovic was particularly good by the end, and he would be an absolutely essential aspect of Fulham's time in the Championship if he had stayed. I mean, there was talk that he could have gone. And I thought he would go actually, but I think when he came to Bournemouth, there was that space, and that's he was able to see it as more of a long-term thing. I think that's how he described it. So yeah, it was an interesting time. I think it took a lot of people by surprise, but because there was that sort of backstory to it, there was that long-standing interest. That it didn't come as a total surprise. I mean, the length of time it took was. Yeah. Was I think frustrating for all involved, particularly those trying to write about it. But no, it was. It's a move that I think has actually worked out for everyone in the end. It's given Scott Parker, he's doing a good job at Bournemouth. Fulham have obviously excelled since he's gone. So yeah, one that sort of suited everyone, I think.
How can we talk about Fulham and not talk about Mitrovic as well? He's been absolutely outstanding this season. He's grabbed 40 goals in 40 games, but that comes after scoring 4 in 31 in the Premier League last term. How has the change in approach from Marco Silva benefited him? And is there a belief he'll achieve in the Premier League this time round?
Yeah, I mean the fundamental thing for Mitrovic last year is that he wasn't first choice. Tactically, Scott Parker and his staff wanted to do something different. They wanted to be a bit more of a counter-pressing team. They wanted to be a bit more fluid and a bit more dynamic, and they wanted a striker like Dom Solanke. I genuinely think he's the perfect striker for what they're doing now, but also what they will want to do next year, because Mitrovic isn't that. Mitrovic is a target man. You want to play to his strengths, and in the end, Fulham used even Cavallero, who's a winger, mainly as a centre forward. And the one thing that did for them in the Premier League was their conversion rate. And Cavallero's finishing in front of goal wasn't great. I think his confidence dropped. And if they genuinely had a striker who could score a few goals, they would have gone up, or a striker that they would have wanted to use. Obviously, with Mitrovic, they ended up not seeing eye to eye, and he was limited to his appearances and his minutes. So I mean, we said 31 appearances there. I mean, that's, when you actually translate that to minutes, it's nowhere near as much as that. So I think the big thing with Mitrovic, obviously, new managers come in, has basically said to him, he's a massive admirer and wants to get the best out of him. And Mitrovic has just bought into what Marco Silva wants to do. And the way they play tactically involves Mitrovic a lot. He says he has a lot of freedom to drop deeper, to link the play. And we've seen that with him He's got more assists this year than he's ever done in a league season. And that just underlines that he's become a bit more of a rounded player. And because Fulham creates so many chances in this attacking system, he just takes them. That's what he does. Give him the chance, he generally scores goals. And it's just been a very good fit. I think when Marcus Hill was appointed, and you look back on his teams that he'd had through Everton, Watford, Hull, and Olympiacos, you could see that a sort of more of a target man striker would really suit what he wants to do, and that's how it's played out. And I think that the Premier League debate, I'm really looking forward to seeing how Mitrovic does, because his 2 seasons with Fulham, I always find it a bit almost not. I suppose it is a bit lazy, really, when people say you can't do it in the Premier League, because it's not wrong to say that he hasn't done the Premier League yet. But when you actually take the context of the 2 seasons he had with Fulham, the first one, they went through 3 managers, they signed a load of players. It didn't work. Collectively, it didn't work, but he still scored 11 goals in a team that was relegated. And then last year just fell out of favour. So in a team that's playing to his strengths, where he's happy, confidence is high after a silly number of goals scored this year, then maybe we'll see where he's capable of, because he's always done it for Serbia. So that's always been the sort of the counterpoint. And I think in a good team he will do it, but Premier League is very tough, and especially when you're a struggling side. So we'll have to see, and everyone will be watching very closely. And I think how he does will be key to whether Fulham can break their sort of yo-yo cycle and stay in the top flight.
One thing we was discussing before we come on today as well was the records. So Mitrovic has the record for the Championship, 40 goals in 40 games and counting. But we did discuss some records well before that. I'll leave it to you. So.
Yeah. No, there's it's always a funny thing. So obviously he's taken the Championship record of Ivan Toney, which is basically the record since the Championship was rebranded in 2005-06, I think, which was 31 goals. So he's absolutely smashed that. Next up for him is Guy Whittingham's 42, which Whittingham managed with Portsmouth in 1992-93, which is the record in the second tier for a 46-game format. So basically, it's the modern record, essentially. Yeah. And once you go beyond Whittingham, you're dating back a good 50 years to a different era of the game, really, where you've got some very impressive figures, and I think Brian Clough's in amongst them. Derek Dooley, once of Sheffield Wednesday, I think, is in around these numbers. But the actual second tier record is held by George Campsall of Middlesbrough, who incredibly managed 59 goals in a 42-game format. So obviously this is pre-92. It's 42 games in the second tier. So I don't think that will ever be beaten. But that's the sort of area he's in. From a Fulham perspective, their record is actually 43, and it's held by someone called Frank Newton, which he managed in 1931-32. So he'll have his sights on that for sure, and that would be quite something. I mean, that's nearly a 100-year-old record. So that'd be very impressive if he manages to pull that off.
And it's not just Mitrovic. I believe Fulham are a goal away from actually beating the Championship record as well for the number of goals scored.
Yeah, no, they'll want to hit 100. They want to be the first team since Kevin Keegan's Man City to hit 100, which was in 2001-02. As you say, yes, the record is, again, I think when the Championship was rebranded, is Reading with 99. I think they'll manage that in the next 4 games. 4 tough games, but they'll want to do that and then hit 100 goals, because it will be reflective of the season they've had. That's been, the main talking point. Fulham have scored a hatful of goals. I think they've scored more than 3 on 16 occasions this year. So they're they have been very impressive and hitting those records. They'll want to do it. They'll want to have those records as evidence of how good the season has been.
And they've also scored 7 goals on a number of occasions, which, to be fair, is a bit of a rarity, isn't it? Apart from our 8-0 against Birmingham quite a few seasons back.
Yeah, of course.
Always have to mention that one.
Yeah, definitely. Got to get it in. It's a famous season and a very famous result. They did it twice. They did it at Blackburn. They did it at Reading. I think I'm going to have to test my stats knowledge here, but if I remember rightly, I think they're the first team. They're definitely the first team since the 19th century to score 7 goals on the road twice, or win by 7 goals. It's one of those, which was quite something. I think the Blackburn one was one of the big moments of Fulham's season, really, where we all just sort of sat up and thought, "My God, this is incredible." I think it was about 400 Fulham fans who'd made the midweek trip, and I don't think any of them will ever forget that. And then obviously they did it again, and then they beat Birmingham City 6-2, and they beat Bristol City 6-2. There've been some very, very impressive results this year, and I think they'll be hoping to keep adding to that goal tally. And I don't think they'll be hitting those numbers before the end of the season, considering the caliber of opponents. But to be honest, you never know. You never know.
What I wanted to do as well is mention the game at Craven Cottage as well, when we drew 1-1, and it was a good performance by both sides. It was quite clear to everybody, if you knew nothing about the Championship, that it was a top 2 clash. Of course, Steve Cook made an unbelievable block and then left. How surprised, and considering following Cherries during the Premier League years, how surprised was you by that?
I was surprised. I mean, I wasn't surprised in terms of what I was aware of, in terms of, it looked like Steve Cook was going to go. It was obviously out of favour. Gary Cahill would come in. There's good competition at centre half at Bournemouth now, and for him, he'd want to keep playing. And I guess the thing from a Bournemouth perspective is the fact that he's gone to Nottingham Forest, and you can only see what's happened to Nottingham Forest since. So it's a huge loss. I think I suppose it's more a sentimental thing, isn't it? As much as anything, because of who Steve Cook is and how long he'd been at the club. The things he'd experienced, and that ties that he embodied to the best times under Eddie Howe. And it was a shame to see him go in that way. And I think in that game against Fulham, you saw his qualities he can bring. The fact he puts his body on the line, and I'm sure he's hugely missed at Bournemouth, and I'm sure the hope will be that he doesn't inspire some kind of late Forest charge that proves costly. But no, I think and going back to that game as well. You're right, it was a fantastic game. I thought it felt like a real proper Premier League game. Tactically fascinating, because Scott Parker set up with 2 wide forwards and had Christie sort of that false 9, and you had Fulham playing very well, and obviously that amazing opening goal. And there was so much feeding into that game, because of all the links, and Parker and Mitrovic, and it was great. It was a really enjoyable game. And then you had that goal as well from the kickoff, which was not unfamiliar to Fulham fans who, when Fulham won promotion via the playoffs, they won it through a fantastic Joe Bryan free kick, which was whipped in, aimed at the near post from long distance, which was one of those tiny details that they would work on, and obviously did it with a kickoff in that game. So obviously Fulham came back and equalised. And no, it was very entertaining, and one of the best atmospheres I think if not the best atmosphere at the Cottage this year. It's definitely up there.
Of course, Cavallo has been an outstanding talent this season as well. How much are Fulham going to miss him next season?
Hugely. I think he's, as you say, he's a brilliant talent, naturally gifted young player who I think he is too much for a lot of Championship players, and you can tell when they're at another level by the way they think 2-3 steps ahead of everyone else. His movement is brilliant, technically outstanding, scores goals, works really hard, and I think that's what sort of set him apart, is mentality, because he's a hard worker. He presses very well, and because of all the speculation, the rumours, you would assume that he would struggle or it would affect him, and it hasn't really. He's stayed consistent. He's been continuously one of the first names on Marco Silva's team sheet, probably behind Mitrovic. He's been a real revelation, to be honest, and we saw a glimpse of that at the back end of the Premier League season, and you just wonder if maybe he'd been introduced sooner. But it's a different world in the Premier League of those pressures. But no, he's a top talent, and he will do well at Liverpool. I've no doubts about that.
One thing that Scott Parker has done is he's tightened up the defence. We've had 3 clean sheets in a row. Okay, 2 of them were 0-0s. The third was, of course, the big 3-0 win at Coventry on Monday. How do you reckon Fulham will set up to try and break that record?
They won't change. Fulham don't change, really. Marco Silva plays with a 4-3-3, sort of a 4-2-3-1 with Carvalho almost at 10, a little bit higher. They will play the same way. They will play their positional, progressive football. They will want to try and exploit any gaps that they can find, but generally they have a very similar system, and that's just how they will approach the game. I think it's been interesting how Bournemouth have tightened up. I think it's probably one of the strongest assets that Bournemouth have got under Scott Parker, as much as they've got brilliant attacking players, but it's that solidity and control is massive. And I think, considering the wobbles and the nerves and the frustrations, I think going back to those basics and getting those points, which were good points, Sheffield United away is good point, Borough's good point, and then a brilliant win over Coventry, who seem to have Fulham's number this year. They have been absolutely outstanding in both games against Fulham, and showed that when you do press Fulham in the right areas, and if Fulham are not 100% on it, you can catch them. So I'm really intrigued to see how Scott Parker sets up. I'm really intrigued to see where Bournemouth try and press, and how Fulham respond to it, because Fulham have been absolutely brilliant. But we're all looking now at next year. Where that's the big thing, and you're looking. And this is really almost a Premier League game in waiting. So with obviously there'll be different squads next year, I'm sure, both sides. But you will get a better sense of where different teams are at. And no, it should set up to be a very intriguing contest. I think a point probably suits Bournemouth enough. It's just about ticking over and not struggling too much. Fulham will want to win just to get to the title as quickly as they can. But I'm hoping it carries the same energy that we saw in West London earlier this season.
Of course, seeing as we are getting closer and closer to the line ourselves, the nerves are out there. Can you put them to bed, Peter?
Well, will you do it? Will you do it? Is that what you're asking? Yes,
yeah, and when?
Yeah. I couldn't tell you when, but I'm pretty sure Bournemouth will do it. I mean, it's I think there was a few weeks back where you look at the fixtures, and from Bournemouth, from Fulham looking down, you look at Bournemouth and think, oh gosh, those fixtures are tough, and unless form picks up, that could be trouble with the way Nottingham Forest are just cycling through teams. I think, obviously Forest come to Craven Cottage on Tuesday night, and obviously Fulham will want to maintain they've got their own targets, as I said. They want the records, they want the goals, they want to maintain their high standards. But I think for Bournemouth, just stopping Fulham from getting to the title quickly will be helpful, just to keep that as competitive as it can possibly be. Even just it will be the play. It's not a question of people not trying or anything like that, but it's a psychological thing where if you've got something riding on it, you're more engaged, I suppose. But no, I think Bournemouth will do it. I think the hardest part is almost over in terms of the fixtures. He says quietly. Obviously, still got to play Forest, which will be intriguing. Yep. But I think maintaining that cushion, which I think Bournemouth will do, will be enough. There's more than enough quality in the squad to do so. And I think if they can get a result on Saturday, then that will make the difference.
And considering, hopefully, we'll be in the Premier League with you, and I'm sure we will be. I'm sure we will be after that. But what sort of changes do you think Fulham and Bournemouth need to make next season to be competitive in a league which is very money driven? and is getting stronger year on year.
Yeah, it's the gap seems to get wider. That's what Marco Silva was saying in his press conference again today. It's really tough. I mean, that's the bottom line, and you want to have a good core. And I think from a Fulham perspective, they're in a much better place than they have been in the two previous promotions on a simple fact of the fact they have got more time. They've got more than 100 days now to prepare. They've got a good core to their squad. They've got a coach that suits the style of play. Like they've got the right ingredients, and they just need the right additions now to just get them to that perfect level. Prepare early, start the season strongly because they previously started poorly. And for Bournemouth, it's similar. It's about getting over the line as quickly as you can, so you can start thinking about next season, making those decisions as soon as possible. Like Fulham, I think there's a good core there. Good core of talent, especially with the likes of Solanke and the experience of someone like Cahill. And you've seen how well Jade and Anthony and Jordan Zamora have done. And I hope they still get their chance. But at the same time, I imagine that they all want to strengthen on those sides. Ryan Christie will certainly be a player who will do well at that level. The experience of Lewis Cook, Jefferson Lerma, they're still there. There's still that Premier League element to Bournemouth, that core. And I think having that will make the difference. And as I said earlier, talking about how Scott Parker evolved the Fulham team tactically in the Premier League, I imagine you may see something similar at Bournemouth. There'll be some tight games, there'll be some difficult games, but there'll be some really entertaining ones as well. And I remember Fulham went to Anfield and played amazingly and beat them. They beat Everton away. They went to Tottenham and really pushed them. Went to Man City and looked good. I mean, it was not an easy thing to do, but that's how they did it. And as I said, I think Solanke is exactly what Scott Parker will want in his centre forward, and I'm sure he's spoken about that endlessly. And I think that may be the difference. But it's going to be tight. It'll be tough for both teams if they get there, and a lot will depend on how their summers go, really. And if they recruit in the right areas, then they'll give it a shot. But even that may not be enough, considering how much money is spent now in the Premier League and the gap that exists.
One of the final questions, actually. I do have a little bit of an off-topic one as well. But how do you think it's going to go this Saturday? I know it's a big one. Because I think a point would suit probably both teams. I think it'll be another draw. It just depends how Fulham come out from Tuesday, because if it does give them that boost of confidence, then I could see them being very, very effective, and could easily cause Bournemouth some problems because there's that pressure. And Fulham don't have that really now. They do for the title, but it's nowhere near the same thing. Nowhere near the same thing that's on Bournemouth's shoulders. And I suppose when you think of it in that context, the first goal is absolutely massive, because if Fulham score early, and they do tend to start fast, in the same way that Bournemouth do, really, it becomes a bit edgy. I can see it becoming a bit edgy at the Vitality. So, draw if not a Fulham win, but we'll see. Last time Fulham and Bournemouth met, Scott Parker pulled out some very interesting tactical tricks. He did the similar at Coventry, didn't he? So, wouldn't bet against him doing that, and that would change the complexion entirely. But who knows? Fulham may still be nursing some hangovers, so that may also play a part. To be honest, it would be brilliant if we can get the victory against Fulham, and just for that sole reason that you pointed out earlier on. Of course, with Forest coming up afterwards, hopefully we can get the 3 points, and that'll put that little bit of pressure on Fulham to go and take points off Forest. Which, if the results work out in the right way, could see a victory against Swansea, seeing us promoted. But let's not get too ahead of ourselves at the moment.
That time of the year, though, isn't it? I mean, with Fulham, it's been the same. I think Fulham are, as it stands, it's 7 points they need for the title. If they win on Saturday, it's down to 1. But obviously, if they lose, then it's still 7.
Final question, actually, and it's a little bit off topic. Eddie Howe, Newcastle, when he took over there, And considering how you probably had lots of press conferences that you was involved in where Eddie was speaking, and the fantastic job. And I don't think it'll ever be bettered. He was the manager of the decade for the EFL. Considering what he had to take over at Newcastle and how much in the mire they were left, what a great job he's done. And what's your view on that?
No, absolutely. I mean, he's done a phenomenal job, hasn't he? I think he's. It was interesting when he was appointed because there was the talk about Unai Emery wasn't there, and so Eddie Howe, and I think, and as a Bournemouth fan, you'll know, having covered Bournemouth, I've seen it, and the general dismissal of Eddie Howe's achievements over such a sustained period is incredibly frustrating because, as you say, you all know the story. Everyone knows the story of how he took them from League Two to the Premier League and kept them there for 5 years. In the current modern day and age, which we're seeing, and you can see it with Fulham, you can see it with Norwich, you can see it with Sheffield United. It's bloody hard. It's bloody hard. And you could see, I think when the appointment was made, I think there was he got Bournemouth relegated, didn't he? And it's like, well, that's not really the story of that season. You go to the injuries and everything else that happened that year. You just kind of knew he'd do well. Knew he'd be fine. You knew he was the right man for that job. I mean, because of how negative the atmosphere had been at Newcastle, he is exactly the kind of manager you want. Coming in to lift the group. The way he's brought the group together, instantly implementing his methods. There was probably that little bit of doubt because of what happened at Burnley, but there were mitigating circumstances during his time at Burnley. And the way that he's lifted the team, the club's come together, some fantastic results, the home form that they have, it's no surprise. It's no surprise at all. And he will do well there, considering the resources that they have. Not an easy job, not an easy job, and it's going to really test him, particularly in terms of all the discussions about sports washing and the ownership at Newcastle, because that's inescapable. It's inescapable, and that's a very different environment. And so far, he seems to be handling it well. There will be continued questions, and there has to be continued questions because of the nature of who owns Newcastle United. But in terms of the actual job he's doing on the football field, it's been very impressive.
I thought when he first took over, I thought it's a poison chalice. I thought they didn't have a victory. They had a lot of players, a couple of players injured as well, some big players. And what he's done is phenomenal.
When he was appointed, we did it was the read I always wanted to do when covering Bournemouth about Eddie Howe and how he works. And the thing you can get with a lot of managers is you'll get people just really doing pieces like that. People want to talk positively, but across the long period, you had a lot of people just praising him to high heavens, and it wasn't just a case of players saying he's a good coach, whatever. He improved me individually. Those are the kind of things that come back. You'd get all these examples of how he worked tactically, individually with players and elements of their game, bringing them together, and all these different things. And I think once having put that article together and having heard that repeatedly during my time covering Bournemouth, there wasn't much doubt. And that's probably why you had that with a lot of the local guys who covered Bournemouth and Eddie for a long period, because you hear it, you can see it, and you see it in the examples of the players that improved, likes of Simon Francis, Charlie Daniels, Mark Pugh, Steve Cooker, we mentioned earlier, lifting them to levels that they themselves probably didn't actually realise they could reach. And that can't be undervalued. And to even have you didn't have to have the same sort of levels of improvement at Newcastle to make that impact. I think, for me, there was a confidence that he'd be fine, and that's proven to be the case.
I was walking down the beach first thing this morning, and one thing that comes into my head about Eddie Howe, future England manager.
Everyone says that. Everyone says about. I remember, But the thing is with the England manager, and it was with international football. And I suppose that's the direction international football has gone. It's not quite as appealing as it once was. I think with England job is just hiding to nothing half the time.
Yeah.
I don't think it's intense enough for Eddie Howe, personally. I think he likes the club environment. I think being able to work with players every day, he likes that. He likes to work with players individually as much as he can, and I don't know if that was maybe one day, absolutely. But I think you're looking at the big level. He'd be looking at so he would want to challenge himself at the higher levels of the Premier League and Europe's biggest leagues, and he's shown a willingness to look abroad and look at other coaching methods and things, and for sure, I think in terms of ability, yes. I mean, as a coach, yes. I think as a statesman character, I think he could do it, but I think just whether he would want to miss the day to day, but we'll have to see.
Well, he was always the first one in, last one out here at Bournemouth. So I've got to agree with you on that. The England manager's job, you get a game every now and again. You go in a way to watch teams all over across the country, but you're not actually out there, managing that team week in, week out, which I think Eddie enjoys. So I completely understand that. Well, hopefully, Peter, at some point next season, we'll be doing this all again. Hopefully, no mentions of VAR and Hawkeye. Hopefully none of that. But hopefully we'll both have very, very successful seasons in the Premier League next year. And I'm sure that you'll be looking forward to another visit down to Dean Court in the Premier League.
Yes, definitely. Absolutely. As I say, I'm looking forward to getting down to the beach this weekend and hopefully get to come back again as much as possible. So, absolutely.
Excellent. Well, thank you so much for joining me, Peter. And it's been an absolute pleasure to talk to you again.
No problem. Thank you so much for having me. It's been a pleasure.
Cheers, Peter. And thank you, everybody, for joining me on this opposition preview show. Please do remember to hit the like, the subscribe and the bell button below to be alerted to any new videos we do here on Up the Cherries in all departments. Please do check out our interviews. We had Neil Granger on recently. We also had the singing Coventry fan, Gareth Withers. We had Jeff Winter. We've also had interviews with Steve Cook. Hopefully he won't be scoring any goals against us for Nottingham Forest. Steve Fletcher, Luther Blizzett, Effa the Cuckoo, of course Harry, and many, many more. Until the next video, up the cherries, and I'll see you then. Thank you for joining me.